microphone. Please do keep your cameras and microphone off up until we have time for question and answers, at which point you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. We're just trying to eliminate background noise and bandwidth issues. So please do keep those off for now. Great. So let me get started with introducing us. So we are Khulisa Management Services. We're a monitoring and evaluation firm that is based outside of a couple of countries, but our head offices are in South Africa and in Washington, D.C. And then we have project offices in Zambia, in Ghana, in Eswatini at the moment. So we've got a really strong footprint in Africa. We've been providing monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning services in Africa for 30 years now. And really our vision is that we want to support African people and institutions to better demonstrate the results, the impact of their programming, and use high quality data for decision making to ensure accountability and to build knowledge. So we really appreciate the opportunity to get to share some of our experience with you today. Quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. So we'll start with a bit of an icebreaker, and then we're going to talk about an introduction to, data collection, the science behind data collection, the role of AI in this space. And then we're going to look at some specific tools and approaches. So some of the tools you'll see there that we're going to talk about today: Jotform and Catty, Tangerine, ArcGIS, and Kobo. And then we'll conclude. Although we'll be talking about different tools, we really are going to be talking about the theory, the decision making, and the process behind choosing various tools. So the focus is not as much on the tools themselves, but the process behind choosing various tools for various data collection needs. At any point, if you have any questions, there is a chat function. You're more than welcome to insert your questions into the chat, and the rest of our team is going to be monitoring that as well. We may only answer questions a bit later in the Q&A component of the day, but yes, please do feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat. So just a couple of rules to keep things good in our session. We are recording this, so we appreciate that your participation means that you provide consent. As I've said before, please keep your microphone muted and your camera off. Please use the chat function and the Q&A function to ask any questions, although I don't think that this is a webinar, so it doesn't have Q&A specifically, it's just chat function. And then raise your hand when we're doing our Q&A part of today. You're welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask questions. And please just be sensitive to other people. Don't use vulgar or insensitive language. Be respectful. And then that's my email address. My name is Jessie. You're welcome to email me if you have any specific questions after today's event. So just as we get started, we'd really like a chance to hear from you and to get a bit of an idea of who all is listening today and what your goal is for this session. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to write out an answer to one of these questions: what expectations you have for this session, or what question you'd like addressed. It'd be good if you just put your name in there to introduce yourself, but you don't have to. If you don't want to, you're more than welcome to stay anonymous. But just to get an idea of what the goals are behind today's session. So I'm going to give you a couple of moments, and I'm going to be checking the chat to just get a sense of who's here and what the thinking is for today. It doesn't have to be a very long question or a long answer, just good to get a sense of who's listening and like what your perspective is coming in. So I'll just wait a few minutes for that. Thank you, Arlene. I see some interest in AI. Very interesting indeed. Great. Thank you, Claire and Sinclair. Yeah, the AI world is certainly growing, and well, I think that that's an understatement. AI is like exploded in the last couple of days, and it really is an interesting topic as to the role and the influence that AI is going to play in data collection and monitoring and evaluation more broadly than that, and research more broadly. And we're going to touch a bit on AI today. We're talking about some other tools as well, and the thinking behind how to select those tools, because those principles and those concepts will still apply to the use of artificial intelligence. Great. I think as we are getting started as well, and talking about, artificial intelligence as well as data collection, the sort of context in which we're collecting data, and the purpose behind why we're collecting data, it might be good to think through some of your data collection experiences most recently. What were the challenges that you had there, but why did you choose to collect data in the way that you did? And is there something that you would have done differently about that? Is there something that you would have changed? And what might be more interesting to consider is, from your recent experiences collecting data, is there something that you think you wished you had AI to do for you, or could have used AI for in your evaluation? I think that, one thing that we'll explore a little bit during the session is that AI there's so much potential, so much possibility there, but it certainly is limited, and it's not necessarily like a kind of plaster that you can just cover over data collection and it can fix all of the problems that we experience with data collection and with some of the limitations that we have really gathering data. That some of the reason why we gather data, still stands in that space where the internet and prior research can't always speak into, the things that we're currently trying to collect data in, and the specific community and the specific context. So I think that that's an interesting perspective to hold as we're getting started and thinking through where AI can be useful and where it's limited. Yeah. So I see that we've got lots of people just interested also in broader perspectives on data collection tools and different factors to consider in tool selection. You are in the right place. This is exactly what we're talking about today. So if you have just joined us, we're taking some questions, sort of responses in the chat to these questions on the screen, just to get a sense of who all is here and what your goal is for the session today. I am going to continue though, as we're going to get kicked off. We'd still like to hear from you, still like to see your responses, but for the sake of time, we're going to start with our introduction to today's session and our presentations. So let me introduce our first speaker, who some of you may know. Our first speaker for today is Ms. Margie Roper. So Margie Roper is a technical expert in monitoring, evaluation, and learning, as well as education. She leads the Education and Development Division at Khulisa Management Services. She's an expert in ECD, early grade reading and learning, child development and protection, resilience, youth development, behavior change, social justice, and protection. So Margie, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the next part of today's webinar.
Thanks so much, Jessie, and really nice to be with everyone today, and thank you all for joining us. Jessie, can you move to the next slide? There we are. So we really have tried to position this gLOCAL event today really around looking at the science behind the data collection. Often we focus on collecting data, and as evaluators, it's really important that we collect quality data and the relevant data that is needed. I think we're all very familiar with data collection processes. And in terms of how we gather the data, really looking at the content of it, and we often select tools either based on the ease or access to it, but we don't always consider that actually the tool that we use is really important in terms of producing the quality data, the right data for us to be able to use it, and really so that from a data science perspective, we've got the rigor that's behind it in terms of then being able to analyze it statistically or through computing or algorithms, or really build our knowledge in terms of the data. And so, you know, at Khulisa, we've been collecting data for a long time, and we're really trying to make sure that we are guided in terms of how we collect the data. And that's something that, as Jessie was saying, we're really looking at in this presentation and in terms of what we're doing. So yeah, so it's looking at this data, the science behind our data collection approaches. We can go to the next slide, and this is also really, you know, it came to the fore with us with this big question around AI, and, you know, what are the implications of that on data collection and data analysis, and on us as evaluators, or monitoring, evaluation, and our whole learning approach. And I mean, as Jessie was saying, this AI has really exploded, and I think it's on the forefront of all of our minds, and it is changing the way that we look at data. The one thing that at the moment is that AI relies a lot on the existing data. And so it still means that when we are collecting data, we need to still have, I think even more so, the rigor behind it, the science behind it, knowing that the data, when you produce the data, it's probably not only going to be used by ourselves in our immediate vicinity of our evaluation or our work, but potentially it's going to be out there and it can be used in a range of different ways, and AI can pick it up and use it. So the one thing is making sure that our data still remains rigorous, quality, valid, and that we have given sufficient thought and conceptual understanding of how we collect the data. And then the other part is that when it comes to the analysis, there are a huge number of tools that can be used. And in some ways that is incredibly beneficial to us as evaluators, but that it doesn't mean that we sit back and we go, oh, look, this report, it's all here. Because as an evaluator, you're bringing a value judgment, and you're bringing particular thinking to what is being presented in front of you and to the data. And that's really where our role is going to become more and more critical in terms of evaluating and assessing and judging the quality of the data, and judging and making these judgments based on criteria and based on some rigor, and really our criteria are going to have to become more and more rigid and more explicit as we look at all this data. And so that really made us also take a step back and go, well, let's look at how do we actually collect our data? What are the decisions that go behind us collecting, you know, looking at a data collection, and what are the things that we really need to be cognizant of in order to have strengthened some of our science and rigor behind the data collection. And it'll be really interesting after our presentation in the Q&A to hear from everyone here your views and your perceptions, and how are you using AI in your evaluations, or potentially how it can be used. Because I think there is this proliferation of it, but us as evaluators, we now having to adapt and consider, what does this mean for us. So on the next slide, I'm going to, I think, jump straight into the tool that I'm going to be discussing.
So I'm going to jump next.
You jumping in, right.
Great. But thank you for that introduction. I'll hand back to you shortly. So yes, my name's Jessie. That's my face. I'm a Monitoring, Evaluation, Research and Learning Associate in the Education and Development Division at Khulisa. So I'm just going to move straight into this. The 5 main considerations that we're talking about today when creating when choosing should be data collection tools and when creating these tools. These considerations are really going to guide the rest of the conversation today, and everything else sort of falls within this. So the first of these is budget. I think this is the one we're most familiar with as evaluators, but of course, the different tool options out there, the different options in terms of, AI tools versus other tools, really there are different cost implications for the different tools that you select. And depending on the budget of the project that you have, there may be different choices for you. And so a primary consideration whenever choosing any kind of tool or software is the budget that you have. The next thing to consider is the people that are going to be accessing your tool, the respondents and the accessibility. And respondents, is typically like a survey type of terminology, but beyond just surveys, also like interview tools and that type of thing, the people that you're interacting with, the limitations that they may have to accessing your data collection tool is another consideration. And it's not just physical access, it's also things like digital literacy. It's things like language and the use of translation, options for translation in the tool. That all forms a part of accessibility and whether or not the respondents can actually engage well with the tool that you're using to collect data. Because although the tool may be good, if the people that you're collecting the data from can't understand how to, add data to that tool well, then the data that you're actually going to collecting is going to be very poor. The third consideration is the kind of data being collected. Different tools lend themselves to different kinds of data. And nowadays, we also have quite a number of like geographic information tools, GIS tools, and they require very different types of data collection. And how we do that, qualitative versus quantitative data. So the kind of data that is being collected and the sensitivity of that data, whether or not, for example, you need data that the tool can score answers within the tool itself. All of these are considerations in terms of the nature of the data being collected, and there are different tools available for those things. How the data will be used. One of our passions, in the Khulisa side is that data shouldn't be collected just for the sake of data being collected. It must be useful to people, and the utilization of that data should be really high. And so for us, how the data will be used then determines what kind of tool you really want to use. Certain survey tools, for example, can begin analysis components and start visualizing your data and integrate some of that data visualization already within the tool. And that could be an important factor for you in terms of how that data is being used, because perhaps it's ongoing monitoring data that you need to be able to rapidly look and see and assess where a program is at, how it is doing, that type of thing. And so that tool could be better positioned for your data use. So how the data is actually going to be used after it's been collected is really an important factor in choosing the kind of tool. And then lastly, anticipated challenges to data collection. And this links a little bit to the respondents and the accessibility, but there may be other challenges that you are expecting and so or could anticipate. And therefore, that could shift the tool that you select in light of these anticipated challenges. And I think often we think through like budget first and not always some of the challenges that we may need to anticipate in our data collection. So these 5 considerations we'll mention throughout the different tools that we're going to be talking about and how they link to the different tools. I'm going to start by talking about survey options for hard to reach places, and specifically when you're trying to collect data to a place or from a population group where either there's limited sort of internet connection and availability, but also things like physically accessing remote places. And so the 2 that I'm going to talk about is Jotform and computer-assisted telephonic interviews, or CATI as it's known. So it links directly to the accessibility component and how you can physically reach those people and those places to collect data from them. So computer-assisted telephonic interviews are surveys conducted over the phone. Beneficiaries are called and asked questions by an interviewer, and responses are captured then into the computerized system being used. So one way that we have used CATI surveys before is when we need to interview teachers from schools across the country. And instead of trying to burden these teachers with like sending them survey links on email that they're not going to have time to get to during their day, or sending somebody physically to go and visit all of the different schools across the country in many different provinces or regions, it's far simpler and easier to access those teachers through a phone call and through then using CATI surveys in that instance. CATI surveys can be more affordable than going into the field because the cost of sending people into the field to collect data is really high. And so it can be a consideration for your budget. And CATI surveys can typically easily give respondents incentives through data or airtime bundles because of the fact that you already have the person's phone number, you've engaged with them around a time to do the call. And so it's really easy to then give them data or airtime as an incentive for responding to the survey. And this works really well in a lot of different African countries that we've collected data in. One limitation is it really, if there is very poor mobile or telephone penetration in the area that you're trying to collect data from, then of course CATI is going to be limited in that way. That penetration could also just be like, if the people that you're trying to reach are people that are not going to like answer the phone and have time to do a survey with you, then of course it's limited in that way as well. Although typically we find that, you know, nowadays with the mobile penetration throughout most places, this is not as much of a problem, but it is a consideration and a potential limitation for CATI surveys. JotForm is a survey tool that can be similar to SurveyMonkey in that it's like it has offline function. You can drag and drop different types of questions and structure the form how you want, and it's very easy to navigate and easy to use. It is very useful for interviews requiring a lot of typing, because one thing that sets JotForm apart from some of these other tools is that you can create a fillable PDF. So you can save this survey as a PDF, like a printed form, but you can fill that in on your computer, save it onto your computer, you know, files, desktop, etc. And then when you reconnect to the internet, it uploads those PDFs as the different survey response forms automatically. There's not quite as many different types of questions or skip logic features as some other survey tools. And so this is really about being able to like use some of the offline functionality for JotForm. So one area that we've used JotForm in that has been really useful is when we were visiting health clinics and having to double check data for data quality audits and interviewing some of the clinic staff. The offline PDF function, because we weren't going in needing to like fill in a survey where you're checking responses on a tablet, we wanted to type all of the responses. We could do that really easily with the fillable PDF, and it captured the data all in one combined server location on JotForm as soon as people were back in connectivity. So the fillable PDF function is really useful for that type of scenario. We also used JotForm on tablets as a survey last year when we were collecting data from refugee youth in different African cities. And in that case, the element of hard to reach was not so much that we couldn't physically get to the locations, it was around the protection of those individual people. We couldn't access their personal information to send them a survey link because of course that they were also minors, some of them. And so their personal information was really well protected. And so in that case, we went to, we did go in the field, we went to the sites of various service providers, NGOs, civil society organizations that were providing either education, healthcare, that type of thing, services to refugees in particular. And there we were able to intercept and survey some of these participants. So JotForm was useful for that because, again, offline functionality, a nice, simple, easy to use survey look and feel and functionality, and we could put the translation into the tool. So that made it really easy to use as well. So these tools, in terms of accessibility, it does address the anticipated challenge of sort of like limited internet connectivity while still utilizing web-based forms. Of course, the simplicity of a web-based form, it's much easier in terms of having all of the data already captured in one set place, but it also limits then capturing errors because you're not capturing from paper-based onto computer forms. So it really is ideal for that. And then these tools, in terms of their use, they're designed for surveys with some qualitative responses. They don't include GIS. They're not really for predominantly qualitative data. Jotform and CATI in particular are really designed as single choice, multiple choice, ranking, all of those types of questions that you can really then use in quantitative data analysis. So going back to our 5 considerations that we mentioned earlier, we spoke about how this data is going to be used. And for that purpose, that's where, you want to consider different types of forms or software if you're collecting a lot of qualitative data, because there are some limitations with the kinds of questions and the kinds of use that these have. When you're talking to somebody over the phone, you don't have a huge amount of time to capture all of their responses, and people typically don't want to spend a long time telling you all of their life story over the phone. And so you really are looking for short surveys that can be very quick and easy to administer over the phone or in an intercept setting, like I mentioned that we used last year with the refugee youth. So that's just to introduce with 2 different tools that we've used when we're in having that lens of hard to reach places and perhaps people groups that are not as easy to access. These are some of the tools that we've used before. I'm going to hand back to Margie now, because Margie is going to introduce Tangerine.
Great, thank you very much. So Tangerine is a tool that was developed by RTI International, and it was specifically developed in terms of assessing learners and the focus around improving learner outcomes. Next slide. And this is a platform and a tool that is available. There's a free version as well as a paid version, but it's really it's a electronic data collection system that is specifically also for immediate responses. So behind it is a whole lot of algorithms, for example, that help in terms of being able to assess learners. On the next slide, so the links are there. Really, it's sort of showing you how you can develop the specific forms, and it's got reports that can be active. You can amend them. You can do a lot of work with them online. It's very easy, once again, to design the assessments and the surveys. And one of the big advantages of this is that you can do timed activities. So if you're doing early grade reading and you want to know how many words per minute a grade 1 or a grade 3 or a grade 7 learner can read, you can actually set it up so that at a particular point it'll flash, and the field worker will be able to touch the word that the learner is on at 1 minute, and again at 3 minutes. And that allows you, from a data analytics side of it, to really look to see, is the learner, how many words per minute or letter sounds per minute are they actually achieving, and are they reaching particular benchmarks, for example. It can capture quantitative and qualitative of data. It's very easy to administer on tablets from both the design point of view as well as the field workers, and for teachers to also be able to use it in the class, so they can actually they can use it, they can as part of their daily assessments or weekly assessments. The data will also be able to be produce reports that can say this individual child over this term has progressed or hasn't, and be able to flag specific areas that an individual child or a group or a grade would actually be able to need additional support in terms of achieving. This can be used offline. Really important to make sure that the data is uploaded and synced. And one's able to also, what's a great advantage is one can also have a large team that is working, and people can have different access permissions. So not everyone would, for example, be able to go in and edit the forms, but your statisticians, for example, who are not in the field, they would be able to download on a daily basis or look at the records to be able to see, you know, what is actually coming out and is one producing quality data. On the next slide. This is actually one of our field workers doing early grade reading learner assessments. This was when we were setting and developing the Setswana early grade reading benchmarks. And you can see here that the child is seeing the hard, you know, the paper-based one, those templates, but the field worker is there with quite subtly sort of being able to track and enter the data. And so it's not, it can also doesn't necessarily be intimidating to the person because it's on a small tablet and it's immediate in terms of what's happening. Critical thing is training the field workers. Field workers need to be familiar with the tablet. They need to be confident to use these electronic devices. And because it's particularly when it comes to the timed activities, you know, a field worker needs to press the word that the child is reading at exactly the 60-second mark, not at the 70 or the 80-second mark, or not at the 3.5 minutes. And it does take practice because there's multiple skills that the field worker is actually having to apply all at once. And that's why we emphasize that in terms of practice, practice, practice. Need to set it up for good data analysis. And that's where, once again, with the tools, not just one person working on it, we really try to work in partnership and collaboration so that we all bring our different set of skills into it in these decisions that go behind the data collection. So our statisticians will help us. Our early grade reading language experts will help us. Us as the evaluators, our field worker manager will also give input so that when we design it, we're designing it for a really, you know, for this expertise and to have quality data that is relevant, that can be used, that gives meaning behind it. And that's where the context is also important. It does require budget because of the training of the field workers, and that probably, but the return on it in terms of getting the quality data is really important. And because often when you're working in schools, it's very dispersed. This really helps because everyone is working on exactly the same formatting in terms of the data being submitted. And as I already said, you need to be tablet or tech savvy in terms of it. Next slide. Okay, so yeah, so that's one example of a very specialized tool. And I'm going to hand over now to Thembi. Jessie, are you going to introduce Thembi? You're on mute. You got stuck.
Okay, so I was getting stuck. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce Thembi quickly, and then she's going to kick us off with the next tool. So Thembi is currently a stakeholder manager on one of the current projects that we have at Khulisa. She's 13 years experience providing technical support on various project activities, project management, training and facilitation, financial management, and stakeholder management. The experience includes mental health programming, social services, and education. She's a certified social worker, and she's currently completing her honors in, her master's in public health and has her honors in development studies. So I'm going to hand over to Thembi.
Good day and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much. I am going to be presenting on a mapping exercise that is called a heat map. And this is one tool that as Khulisa we have started utilizing. It's still at its development stage, but we are happy to share with you this tool because I think it relates better to the topic of this webinar, where we are talking culture, context, and collaboration, but also looking at the 5 considerations that Jessie shared earlier on to say, how do we use budget, how do we use the tool, and what are some of the challenges and things that we can use in terms of data collection. The heat map tool really uses ArcGIS, and I'm just going to share what is it. You can just scroll down all the things, Jessie. So as a definition, colleagues, heat mapping is a visualization tool to identify and highlight areas where the density of features or parameters of interest is elevated. So you will see that on the left, I have examples there, and I will explain what this means. So the visualization can be based on discrete areas. This can include polygons or study areas or demarcation areas. So in both cases, the level of parameter of interest is symbolized by a color. And I will just show you now on the left how this is different when you are just setting up a location and when we are using the heat map methodology. This type of visualization uses color ramps of gradually verifying intensity ranging from pale blue, but also when they get red to yellow, these are your higher values, resulting in the name heat map. So when you think about heat and heat map, the red and the oranges would then symbolize that. So when you look at the upper, this graph, this is just us showing you locations of police stations in Cape Town, and all the blue dots represent a police station in Cape Town. And then when you look here on the second diagram, this is us using the heat map symbology to identify the police station. And when you look, the lighter blue colors would symbolize where areas like that has less police stations. So this is just one, but when you get to the center, this is where you see that the concentration becomes more. And this shows that within the heat map symbology, when you see the orange or the red, it's where you have a concentration of these police stations. So heat maps, when you think about it, currently in our project, we are using it for our measures to counter trafficking in persons project. And this is a new project at Khulisa. And we are trying to create a map representation of high risk factors. In this, we are working together with civil society. We're working together with government departments, including your DSD, your Department of Health, your Department of Home Affairs, your SAPS, the NPA, so that we can say, where is trafficking happening? And can we pinpoint those places where trafficking is happening, and we create heat maps? And you will see how this is going to assist us. So there's different risk factors that we are trying to assess and include so that we can create these heat maps. And this include economic insecurities, where we are talking about populations, we are talking about race, we are talking about gender, we are talking about whether people are employed or not employed, the level of poverty, how is the housing environment, how is education, people in quintile 1 or quintile 2 school, and this is the rating that South Africa normally uses to level the school district information, but also discrimination, what is happening there, and also social and cultural exclusion. Currently, we are just doing this for the city of Joburg and the city of Cape Town. And the map will identify certain risk factors so that we can know that there are places within these 2 locations that can be regarded as high risk areas for trafficking. And this is really, the back end is managed by statisticians. So when we go out to certain places and we map these different areas of interest, whether it's the economic insecurity, the housing, the education, the social or cultural exclusion, a statistician is able to take that and develop a back end that will be able to layer all these things. And currently, like I said, we are just using ArcGIS to be able to create these heat maps. In the next slide, I'm going to show you some of the indicators that we are using. So really, colleagues, when we talk about economic indicators, this is where we're talking poverty, this is where we're talking employment, unemployment, child development related indicators. This is where we go to your child welfare organizations and just look at some of the things that are there in terms of for example, in South Africa, social development will have victim empowerment cases, child abuse and all. And then we try and take those and see where have they happened, and we articulate that as high-risk areas. Migration flow, routes or activities. This is where we collaborate with the Department of Labor and the Department of Home Affairs, just to say in our borders and the transits that surround our borders, the truck routes, the taxi routes, what is happening that is related to trafficking. But also looking at the Department of Labor, what are some of the labor cases that are related to trafficking that have been there. There was an article just a week ago that updated us on one of the cases. But also we are looking at qualitative hotspots where we are going to be in collaboration with civil society and government departments, work together to say, where are the prosecuted cases? Some of them have definite locations, but also because some of the social workers, some of the civil society organizations have been actively working with some of our victims and survivors. They know what has been reported. So we're going to use that. And also we're looking at prosecuted cases. So these domains that we have listed here are going to be some of the locations that we're looking at, and they will be pulled together so that they can create a heat map. And some of you might be asking yourselves, what do we do with a heat map? How is it going to assist us? So heat maps would really be useful in terms of, one, being able to create prevention. So if we know around Joburg that there's a particular risk area, we can go in there with prevention managers, with prevention campaigns, and also advocate for services to say, when we have trafficking in persons victims, what are some of the activities that are critical? When they get to the police station, what needs to happen when they get to a social development, when they get to a Tutuzela care center? But also it will assist government to say, how do we allocate resources to high-risk areas? Because when we are targeting high-risk areas, we are able to have an impact, but also assist the most vulnerable. So really, the use of heat maps is for us to document all of this for the target, for the purpose of planning, targeting, and resource mobilization. And just going back to our theme for the day, this covers some of the contextual issues and also looking at the collaboration. But when Jessie said budget, who is involved and how are we using this tool, this answers that to say, when we have data collection tools, what are some of the aspects that are important so that we can be able to use them? Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Tembi. Our next presentation is going to be done by Tamar. She is a Senior Monitoring, Evaluation, Research and Learning Specialist at Khulisa with more than 10 years experience. And her sectoral experience is education, career guidance, skills development. There's a long list there. Tamar is really an expert in a lot of things: child and youth development, peer-to-peer mentoring, community engagement, etc. So Tamar's going to be taking us through talking through collaborative tool for data collection. And so I'm going to hand over to you, Tamar.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Don't I have the best colleagues? It's such a pleasure to work for the department that we work for. So wanted to say that first and foremost. We've spoken a lot about different types of tools and what their strengths are and what their limitations are. So I actually also want to look at this tool and do the same thing, but outline quite a few things that can be built into this tool. So we're touching even more on AI with this. So if we go to the next slide, Kobo Toolbox. It's almost like my baby at this point. It is a really versatile tool. And one of the best things about it is that it is open source. So from a budgetary requirement, nothing is needed. Anyone can download it, anyone can work on it. And so that makes it accessible to a lot of different people. What's also fantastic is that oh, the whole screen went away. What's also fantastic is that you can translate into any language that you want, which makes it more accessible to those in the community and those that you want to speak to. Now, you can use this tool in a number of ways. You can train field workers and have them collect the data. You can do so remotely. You've got offline options like some of the tools that were discussed earlier. You can do the data collection via an app, so people can just use their phone and input the information that is asked for. You can use a tablet, you can use a PC, literally anything. The cool thing about this is that it can be set up to do on-the-spot calculations and data checks. So I want to go through some of those and why this is so important, because now we're using AI, or we're setting up AI to do calculations for us and actually warn us, like, this might not be right. So as an example, let's say that you're collecting data on the amount of learners in a classroom, and the teacher says there are 50 learners in the classroom. Great. You then ask them to disaggregate by gender, and suddenly that adds up to 60. Kobo Toolbox can be set up in such a way that it will refuse for you to move on to the next question until you fix that. So either it means that the overall number should have been 60, or that you didn't input the disaggregation correctly. So it's a really cool way for a message to pop up and say, are you sure? Let's go back and check what happened here. Now, another really great thing about Kobo is that you can combine a whole host of different types of questions in the same tool. And again, from a budget point of view, that is incredibly useful, because you don't always have the budget to use a GIS tool and a survey tool and an interview tool, and you want to see photos. This can actually do all of those things together. So you see here at the bottom of the slide, you've got all the different types of questions that can be collected. And for instance, you've got here the acknowledge one, sort of in the right middle. And that one is really useful because we all know with the POPI Act, we do sometimes have to ask for permission for particular data to be collected, or for us to publish certain data. So while you're asking the questions, you can actually have it as a pop-up, and you can have the participants sign on the phone or on the tablet or on their own computer, depending on how you're collecting this data. And so you don't then need to have a separate piece of paper or a separate tool for them to sign anything. You can build it all into this particular tool. Another one that is really interesting is sort of at the left middle. It's called Area. Now, for us, it's been really useful. We do some research with in agriculture as well, and so sometimes you will have farmers that say, okay, you know, I've got X amount of hectares of land, and these are the crops that I'm growing. Great, we can take that as face value, but sometimes we do actually have to measure exactly where the corn is grown, how much spinach is grown, and so you want to be able to map that area. Now, this particular question will allow you to set up on Kobo Toolbox that once the field worker gets to that particular question, they literally take the device that they're reporting the data with, and they just walk around the field. They walk exactly around the parameter of whatever it is that you're trying to measure, and it will then bring you all that data. So it will bring you the data of how large it is, exactly what the field looks like. If it's got an odd shape, it will map all of that for you. So it's incredibly useful. And so that's one other way to get AI to sort of work for you, is to set it up really well. So I know that we're all obsessed at this point with ChatGPT, and it's great. And sometimes it feels a bit scary when you're like, oh, but what if my job as an M&E professional will now be taken over by AI? But the big thing is that it's really an art form to ask the right question in the right way. So as Marky said earlier as well, you kind of need to give more explicit instructions to get the information that you want. And that's the same for a tool like Kobo Toolbox, you want to set it up very well. So again, training them becomes really important, especially because you've got this whole host of different types of questions that you can ask. And so you need to be able to train your field workers to be able to use the tool effectively. Now, this also leads us to a very hot topic at the moment, and something that should have been a hot topic for a lot longer than it has been, but to just transition and to decent work indicators. As an M&E professional, it is our responsibility to make sure that, sure, we can measure all these things from different beneficiaries or different participants, but it's our responsibility to make sure that our field workers also have decent work and do what they can do and get the support that they should be getting. So the more stringent that you set up Kobo Toolbox and the better you use coding and AI within this tool, the more respect you're really giving to your field workers and the more learning and review opportunities that they receive. You really empower them to say, look, maybe X, Y, and Z isn't correct. Are you sure? Could you double check this for me? And you can build all of that into the tool. So that is incredibly useful. So hopefully that will lead to more decent work. But the coolest thing about Kobo Toolbox, because you're probably thinking, okay, great, but there's 900 different questions that I can ask. How on earth would I know how to code all of this, or how to input all of this, or how would I know how to set it up in the way that I want to? So if we go to the next slide, we know that the overarching theme for the gLOCAL week is culture, context, and collaboration. Kobo Toolbox has the coolest community ever. I'm actually going to jump into the chat now and put the community link in there as well. It's impossible to remember every single thing that you can do with Kobo Toolbox, but that's okay, because every single question that you have has already been asked and answered in the Kobo Toolbox community. And if it hasn't, because it's so specific, the community is so on point that within an hour you will have a response. So it's a really great community of people that are already using Kobo Toolbox or looking to use Kobo Toolbox. And it really, it creates this community where everyone is really keen to use it to its fullest potential. And again, that is almost something that is our duty as M&E professionals, is to make sure that whatever tool we end up using, use it to its fullest ability, make sure that you treat everyone involved in the process with respect. And the Kobo Toolbox community actually really, really helps with that. So here's the link for you to create your own Kobo Toolbox account, and you can play around with all these question options that I gave you earlier. If you get confused, boom, there's the Kobo Toolbox community. So please have a look there as well. And that is it from my side. I'm going to hand back over to Jessie.
Oh, thank you, Tamara. I'm going to put it like this. Tembi and I are sitting together because her camera wasn't working. So let me see Tembi. Great. So we're going to jump now into the Q&A part of the session. We're running ahead of the schedule, which is nice, gives us a bit more time for Q&A. In order to sort of get this process started, I mean, if you have questions that you've been wanting to ask, you're welcome to put them in the chat. Tamara is monitoring the chat, and so she can let us know if there are any questions there that anybody needs to respond to. You're also welcome to raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask a question. But in order to get us started in the Q&A part, we'd really like to hear a little bit from you about what your space is, what you're using. And so we're going to do a bit of a Mentimeter poll. So if you are not familiar with Mentimeter, it's just basically an online presentation software that can do live polling. So if you wouldn't mind going to www.menti.com, or you can scan the QR code that is on the screen now. There's the code for Mentimeter. There are 2 questions in there. I will jump over to the Mentimeter presentation in a moment. I just want to give everybody a chance to get the code, scan the QR code. But we wanted to hear from you, what are some of the tools that you like to use for data collection, because it's also be great for us to ask you about them, to engage, The Q&A is going to go both ways, by the way. So we might ask you some questions as well. It's not a one-sided Q&A. But to find out some of the tools from you, what you use, and like, what do you think are some of the most important factors that we spoke about for consideration when you're designing the data collection software? We really would like this to be interactive and collaborative. So we don't want it to just be that our 5 considerations are the only ones spoken about. Perhaps there's something in your experience that has been really important for you when it comes to designing data collection that we haven't touched on yet. And perhaps it's things like time, you know, and that's why AI is going to be something that's important for you, is because the time factor is really. So let's jump over to Mentimeter and let's start seeing some responses. I'm going to stop sharing. Just let me know if you need those Mentimeter code or QR code up for a little bit longer. See, it's also
I've also put it in the chat. Yeah.
Great. So then I'm gonna stop sharing and switch over to Mentimeter so that we can see that. 1 minute. Okay, so we've got some responses coming in on what data collection tool is used the most. Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, Excel, SurveyMonkey, Hobo, Bumney. I've never heard of Bumney before, so that's a new one for me. Excited to hear what that is. I see some of these are like data analysis tools as well. Manual surveys. It's a lot more work, but definitely appropriate in some contexts where you can't, use online functionality. In water. All counted. Also, that's a new one for me. RedCap. Okay, interesting tool. 23 answers. We've got 34 participants, so I hope that more people respond. Seems like Google Forms, though. I mean, it's showing up as the biggest one so far. Interviews, SurveyMonkey, and Excel are close after that. But yeah, Google Forms is a very easy to use tool. Because of Google's integration, for most people, it's very easy to use because they already have a Google account for, YouTube or things like that. Okay, I'm going to jump to the next slide for interest, and then we'll go back. Which of the 5 considerations for selecting your data collection tool do you think is the most? Should be able to also see this on yourmenti.com. Go, respondents and accessibility. Okay, we have a tie. Okay. I'm going to give a couple minutes just to get some more responses. This is very interesting. I'm interested that budget hasn't been selected yet.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it's not the most important consideration. That's potentially true, but it is a big one, especially if you work for a particular funder. To keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the poll that for me, the respondents and accessibility is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest considerations fit in around that. Yeah. Okay, don't seem to be any new responses coming in. Oh, there might. "13 people on the Mentimeter." If you're able to, it would be great to capture your responses to this question. Okay, but while the Mentimeter is on the screen, we're really happy to take some questions. I know we touched very lightly on the AI component and the part of things. I mean, I think that there's still so much that's unknown about the AI world. It's its own sort of rabbit hole right now, and then we could really delve into that. And we wanted to stick to some of the reasons, the science around the data collection and why we've made the choices that we've made. And I think that, like I said at the beginning, these considerations still apply to AI and to how the data is being used. And like Margie mentioned, you know, it's using existing data a lot of the time, existing information. It can do interesting things when you upload new data into it, but really that evaluative thinking is what we bring, and it's a critical component for evaluation. And so, yeah, it'd be interesting to hear as well, if anybody is keen to share your perspective, your opinion on AI and its potential use for you. So I'm going to pause there and I'll open for some questions.
I think, I mean, just to a bit of a comment or input. It was interesting. I was talking to an evaluator this week, and she used ChatGPT to actually develop some worksheets for her kids in terms of really helping them with their early grade reading and numeracy. And she said that was really valuable because she didn't have time to do it, but it was a very easy way of being able to use this AI and this technology in a way that can benefit not just from an evaluation point of view, but in terms of her focus as a parent on developing her child's skills it was in English as a second language. And it did make me start thinking in terms of, you know, so at the moment, we don't really think of it in terms of how can it create the tool or the content for the tool. But I'm quite sure that that is sort of one of the next phases of where AI is going. Because looking at all of these tools that we've been sharing with everyone today, the formatting is all there. It's really now the content, which is the next part of it. And when you look at a whole range of tools that are available, for example, to be able to analyze qualitative interviews, for example, we've engaged with a chap at MIT. I'll share the link or share the name of that in the chat just now. And, you know, he's developed this AI software where you can have your interviews, you know, and then you ask it a question. Once again, as Jessie said, you've got to be very clear on the question, and that's going to be the challenge for us. But if you ask the right questions, it's amazing to actually see what comes out from these. Thanks, Jessie. Allies.com is one of them, but it still means that we have to go and validate it. It still means that we've got to check it. So it'll give you the summary. It'll give you where the passages have come from and what the interviews are. But I'm not sure that it's yet able to also identify some of the outliers and the differences in it. There's also a range of software of AI. I suppose we better start calling it AI, not software. That's also available that summarizes, for example, academic papers. And they can give you a 3-minute summary or a look to see, you know, you can ask, you know, how many participants or what were the different methodologies that were used across these studies in these academic papers, and it comes up with it incredibly quickly to be able to do it. Yeah, so I think that there are going to be other changes and things that come forward. So yeah, I'm not sure about costs of that in the future and sort of what is freely available and what is going to be you know, more sort of, you don't have to buy it or invest in it. So it's going to be an interesting one going forward.
So just to comment quickly on the idea of cost, I mean, ALIs, for example, is something that, you know, we've looked at using in some evaluations, and it's quite an affordable tool for AI. It's very easy to have a subscription. I think it's something like $7 per month. It's quite an affordable tool. It is, though, then limited. It needs still, like we've been saying, the evaluative thinking and a familiarity with whatever you're asking it to do, because of the fact that you can't, and this comment has been made about AI, is like when you really interrogate the answers, that's where you can see some of the flaws, that's where you can see some of the errors in the answer. And so I do still think that a person's familiarity with the data that's being put in is valuable to then getting the best out of what the AI tool can do and how it can pull different things together and pull different summaries together. If you're not at all familiar with what you've put in, then you won't know what kind of quality you're getting out of there. And so you can very easily misunderstand the data. So I think in terms of, I don't think at this stage, perhaps things will change in the future, but my opinion is that at this stage, AI still needs quite a lot of human interaction to really be valuable. So I don't think it's replacing jobs when it comes to like our field. You know, my sister works in journalism, and so for her, it's a little bit different. There's a lot more people writing articles with AI now, and so it changes things a little bit, but she still has the same comment that in terms of the actual value that the AI tool can bring, you still need that expertise. You still need that person who understands the human dynamics, the changing nature of data. And so that's where I just think that we still are going to be really critical actors in this world, and that AI is not really going to replace what evaluators can do.
Yeah, and I just like the AI comes out up that, so we still not able to translate or analyze data that is in different languages. It's predominantly English, and this just shows what Jesse has just said, to say yes, there is AI, but there's limitations within AI, so it won't replace everything.
Yeah, and it comes back to, you know, what is our responsibility as M&E professionals? It's to use the tools that are available to you to their best ability. So I always think of it, you know, we can see it as a threat in some ways, but that won't help us any further because it's going to be used anyway. So rather embrace it and see how you can use it, and make sure that it then potentially shifts your focus from, okay, so I don't now need to write 7 summaries because I can have that done. I will check and I will make sure that I incorporate some other findings, but then shift your focus to how can I make this as user-friendly as possible? What will the client need? What type of information must I present? And then ask the right questions to whatever AI tool you're using, or set things up in a way that makes it more user-friendly for your field worker or your participants or your respondents.
Let's go back to talking about the different data collection tools, because I see Maggie also put an option there in the chat. Would be great to hear from some people, if you're willing to unmute, just on your opinion of different tools. I mean, there's some that we presented, but on tools that we didn't present on. The other things that you use, your experience of them, and why you would recommend them. If you haven't filled in the Mentimeter, there's the code on the top there. Please do go ahead and put in your response. Like, for example, maybe somebody who put in Bumni can explain what that is, because I don't know that tool.
I'm looking the tool up now and it looks very interesting. It's a hospital system for low resource settings. So it can really improve patient care and things like that. So definitely something we should maybe pass on to our health division.
Do we have any brave people willing to unmute?
I mean, another thing is, and especially it's because I'm seeing Google Forms so much now, right, as a preferred tool. There are some funders that require you to use particular tools, and they don't allow you to use others. And in those situations, you would then need to make sure that you know as much as possible about the tool that they prefer. But you can also suggest other forms and just make it known that, look, I know that this is the preferred tool, but I happen to know that X, Y, and Z might be more useful because of A, B, and C. So keep that dialogue open, but in the end, it's their decision. Sometimes we just have to use what's available to us.
Great. Maybe I'll just ask for open-ended open-ended for any feedback on REDCap as a tool, because I see that's also growing now. Has anybody in the group got any thoughts on that tool and why you prefer using it? No problem, Arlene, thank you.
I think, I mean, let me just talk about REDCap quickly, because we did an evaluation of reading support projects, and they were using REDCap. I think once again, and with a lot of these systems, it is around really being able to set it up, and so that you've got to have good data coming into it. So you still need to have really good data collection and the training of everyone, so that there is consistency and it's built into the daily activities of the implementation of an intervention or a system strengthening approach. And that becomes really important. So these sort of things need to be used on a daily basis. You can't sort of wait and leave it and hope that it sort of gets inputted a month later or 2 months later, because you've actually lost the data and it's not really meeting your quality requirements in terms of it. Huge value if you've got a good, good people and a good team within your organization that is really there and using the system and making sure that everyone uses it. And this is also where the leadership and the management within an organization becomes important. It's been quite frustrating in some of our evaluations where it's up to one person to collect all that internal monitoring and evaluation data, and it's separate from the actual implementation, and it's not used for decision making. It doesn't have the leadership and the clout behind it of that investment in their time to be able to use it. And we might sort of really look at all these tools and look at AI and do it, but it still relies on committed individuals and the leadership and the management and the quality and the commitment of people to be able to use data.
Great. We have a couple questions in the chat that maybe we can respond to tomorrow. I'm going to put you on the spot for this one. Is there any relative advantage for Google Forms versus Microsoft Forms? I don't know if you've worked with those. I'm going to stop sharing to switch back to the other presentation while I answer tomorrow.
I haven't actually worked with Microsoft Forms, so I can only speak to Google Forms. I mean, it's easy to use, which is really great, but it has limited skip logic functionality. And so that can sometimes get a little bit frustrating when you have to ask particular questions to particular respondents. And then if you can't use any skip logic, it kind of means that everyone now needs to respond to a 20-minute survey instead of a 5-minute one that we would have gotten the information from. But I can't speak to Microsoft Forms. I don't know if Margie, have you worked with it?
I haven't worked with it, but interestingly, I'm getting more and more surveys and requests for setting up meetings and times and that sort of thing, all through Microsoft Forms. So as a user of them, there's very little difference in a way of being able to, at the face value, but I haven't seen the back end of it or the data that comes out from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe if there's anybody in the meeting that wants to share any insight on Microsoft Forms in terms of creating forms.
Okay, let me jump in because I can see I see there's one also about Power BI. So Tamara, I know you've been interested in this, but let me just respond in terms of RedCap. In terms of data loss, it's more that if what we found is that the way that this particular organization had set it up is that there was a lag in terms of the data being entered into RedCap. This was a couple of years ago, and it may also have changed, but they still relied on paper-based. All those paper-based things went into a central data capturing point, and then it was put onto RedCap. And when we did our data quality audit, we did see that there was a loss of data because of that system. We did provide recommendations, and I know they did use a lot of them in terms of being able to then prevent this data loss. And that's where we'd recommended you have to build it into your daily operations. And so I hope, Esther, that has helped to answer that and clarify that question.
Great. Tamara, do you want to speak to Power BI?
Would love to. So one of the things that I really enjoy is data visualization, and I really enjoy making sure that the client or whoever looks at the data that you present actually understands it so that they can use it. That's often the big problem with Ebony, is that you present a whole bunch of data and you look at it once and go, okay, great, thanks. But the big question is, so what? What do we use it for? And Power BI is really powerful with that. You can set up a lot of different types of interactive dashboards, and you can visualize the data in a way that really makes sense. So the more you know about the background and the more you know about how to input the data in a particular manner, the more useful it becomes for someone to use. I'm also just seeing the discussion on the Microsoft Forms versus Google Forms. I mean, it's definitely the biggest thing would be if you work with Microsoft 365, then obviously Microsoft Forms would probably be the thing that you would turn to first. And so that would be something that we would probably start doing. However, we have a lot of clients that have Google Drives, and so that then also determines what you're going to be using. But in terms of functionality, it seems like it's very, very similar. Jessie actually did a really cool course for dashboards in a day. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I think Power BI is an incredibly useful tool because of, I think the thing that appeals to me the most about Power BI is that you set up your data cleaning and your data formatting or whatever right at the beginning, and it saves that so that as you're uploading new data, it automatically does the cleaning and the formatting basically of the data for you. So it saves a lot of time. And it's really easy to use and to share. There is a free version of Power BI, which also makes it very easy to use. Yeah, of course, that is sort of where it gets limited when it comes to sharing like live dashboards and that type of thing. You've got to have various different types of accounts to be able to do that in particular levels. But I do find I find it very easy to use, and I also find that it's quite easy to design as well, so that when you want to design the dashboard in line with particular branding or whatever, it's pretty much best to create those templates on PowerPoint or something like that you can upload them, but then it's quite easy to use. So that's something that I've really enjoyed about Power BI as well. But yes, Microsoft also has a lot of support that they provide for Power BI, so that also makes it really useful functionality wise. And like you said, Tamara, if you're a Microsoft 365 user, then it integrates really well, and you can use it. It integrates with PowerPoint, it integrates with Excel, a whole bunch of things, so that you can use it quite easily. So I think that we Please, if there's more questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, but I think we're going to move into a conclusion. We're ahead of time, and so we're just going to end a little bit early if we do end earlier, because there's, it's always lovely to have an extra 20 minutes to the day. So yeah, but if there are any other questions, you do have our contact details. Please do contact us. We will get, the slides shared publicly and the recording on YouTube, and we'll share that with everybody as well a couple of days after the webinar, so that you can access it as much as we'd like to. So I'm just going to move into our conclusion for today. Oh, recent AI tools, sorry. Before we conclude, Margie put this together. These are some tools that have come up. Margie, I don't know if you want to speak to it.
Yeah, just so, it's been very interesting doing my PhD, and with, how you always get these consortiums and groups and networks and that. And there's been a lot of sharing amongst my group around, available tools. And so I thought I'd just put this together around finding and synthesizing literature. And some of these tools I really think are really helpful for baseline studies, landscape analysis, looking at needs, looking at the relevancy of particular interventions and evaluations, understanding what is there, and potentially for being able to identify indicators, etc., and the evidence for theory of changes, for example. And so on the left are a whole range of different tools that are available. And then on the right is around the data analysis, so Excel formula bot, which is actually, once again, if you get stuck, being able to use it. The ALES one that we were talking about earlier. And then also for help in terms of writing. These won't write it for you, but they will really help you in terms of grammar and synthesizing and writing it for the audience, for your audience. And these I use Grammarly a lot, Trinker, Lex, Scrivener. There's a host of these that are available. On here I didn't include, for example, Otter AI, which is also a way of being able to record what people are saying in an interview. Even though they do struggle with our South African accents quite a bit, you can end up with some really strange things written up that you go, what is this? But you've got the voice recording, and because it's online, you can tap on it, it'll give you the word that the person said, and it's much easier to then go and clean up the transcripts. And then these you can also upload in terms of the analysis, etc. So I just wanted to share some of these, and I think that it would be really interesting over time that maybe we as evaluators actually start collecting some of these, share how we've used them. So I think from Khulisa's side, we'll be putting some of these onto our Eval Tuesday tips. We've got a blog that we've also developed based on this, so we'll be sharing that. Probably release it tomorrow, so have a look at our website and social media platforms for it. But it would be really nice if we could maybe keep this conversation going. And the other ones that have been mentioned, as well, in terms of tools and options, I think we will also add to this slide presentation before we that Mentimeter one, etc., before we actually send it out. Yeah.
Thank you. Garth, just quickly on your question about offline forms, all of the ones that we've mentioned today work offline. So the SurveyMonkey, we didn't actually mention that one, but SurveyMonkey and Kobo Toolbox, JotForm, they're all Tangerine, Kobo, sorry, ArcGIS, sorry, Margie?
No, I also said Tangerine, and you just at the same time as you said it.
They all work offline, and so it does make it really easy. Of course, you have to reconnect in order for them to upload onto the server, and so that's there is some connectivity needed for that, and we do recommend doing that very frequently, as often as possible, in terms of at least like once a day, but or twice a day, in order to be able to check from a data quality side that all of the data has been captured. We need to do any mop-up, was there any error on the forms, that type of thing. So we do recommend doing that very frequently, not sort of waiting until the end of the data collection efforts to upload everything because it can cause issues. But yes, they do all work offline. Great, no problem. So in terms of our conclusion, where to from here? The future of M&E is the overall theme of the gLOCAL series this year, culture, context, and collaboration. And so as we're sort of moving towards our conclusion, you know, we want to talk about how this data collection science and thinking does feed into and affect and is influenced by culture, context, and collaboration, because these are factors that affect all evaluation and everything that we do. The reminder of our 5 considerations, you know, we spoke about basically how we can access different people and the kind of data, the use of the data, the budget we have for the data, all of that in terms of collecting data. And that really then, all 5 of those are affected by the context in which you're working, the culture in which you're working, and the collaboration or the partnerships around it. So in terms of culture, these are some of the considerations that we need to look at. What is the resistance to or the embrace of technology of the people that you're collecting data from? Because that could determine what kind of tool you really use, whether or not there is a fear of AI, an awe of AI, how people respond to that. It might then affect your ability to use that kind of tool and those kinds of softwares with those people. In terms of the diversity of the population from which you're collecting data, is your tool able to collect data appropriately from the different kinds of people? For example, if you're collecting data in a society where there may be different access to technology between men and women, and your then data collection tool uses technology, you might get skewed responses because you're only then collecting data from the people that have access to cell phones, to mobile technology, for example. And so it might not actually reflect that population well. And so in thinking about diversity and really that context, that's very important when it comes to the kind of data collection that you design. And that's something that we can often misconstrue, not misconstrue, we can like make assumptions about. We assume that most people can access X, Y, and Z. And when it comes to then what are your evaluation questions, what are you really trying to answer, you have to think about the accessibility also then of the different groups of people when you're looking at a diverse population group and a diverse, I guess, study population. And then development in transition, looking at how different cultures and different contexts where there is just transition happening, where there is development taking place. And so there's different almost levels of development and access to development, if I can call it that, within the society, then that culture will also influence the kind of data collection tools that you can use. And so these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind. When it comes to context, I already mentioned this, unequal access to technology within a society and just transition. How is the change toward the climate change, how is that playing a role in terms of people being able to develop their economic empowerment, their social empowerment, and how can that influence then the kinds of data that's being collected and how it's being used? It is it's imperative for all people now to prioritize addressing climate change and to prioritize addressing this transition. And so for all of us, we can't just sort of think of it as, well, somebody else will evaluate that. It's somebody else's question, somebody else's concern. We have to think about how is this data going to be used to enhance just transition across all of our evaluations, because the reality of climate change and the reality of what kind of environment people, whether they can physically live in the space that they're living in now, if they live by the coast, if they live, you know, in very dry areas, that's physically going to be changing rapidly over time. How is our data use and the kind of data we're collecting enabling a just transition for those people? And so that's something we really have to consider when it comes to also the way that we collect data. Confidentiality and data privacy is really important nowadays. It's something that we have to consider, and there's different legal requirements in different parts of the world. And so when it comes to the context as well, that's something that you have to be aware of. For example, when it comes to live events, we're collecting data at a very large conference next week, and we have to think about this. Just because there's an app that people can use to collect data in the conference, what is the confidentiality and the privacy around that? Because there are there's legal implication now around collecting people's information and what happens to that. So that's something that you have to consider as well when it comes to how you collect data. And then the progress, the behavior change of the society and the people that you're collecting data from. When it comes to this context, I think it's something that we have to keep checking is the assumptions that we make and how outdated those assumptions are, because society is progressing, people are changing, people's interaction with other people is changing, the power dynamics between an interviewer and an interviewee is changing. And so we have to check our assumptions and judge these things as we go so that we're making sure that we're using appropriate tools, but not just tools, appropriate approach and methodology and interaction with the various people that we're trying to collect data from, in terms of, you know, really respecting and having almost like an African evaluation mindset. We want to make sure that if we're collecting information from people, that we're giving information and feedback back to people as well. And so that kind of relationship and ensuring that we're treating people with justice and equality is really important. And then lastly, collaboration. The partnerships that we want to have must go beyond just what kind of tool can I use to access this group of people, but we need to make sure that our partnerships are really thinking about how can this tool be used to reach these people appropriately. And I think that we've touched on this in several ways as well, but it's like it's not just the partnership with the technology, but it's the partnership with the society and how we're engaging the people that are collecting data from, so that then the tool is beneficial to them and our interaction is beneficial to them. I think far too long evaluation sort of just comes in and collects data and then leaves and doesn't really then feed that information and that support back into where we've collected data from. And so that's something that as evaluation is changing and growing, we need to think about that as well. And then the utilization of the data. Whatever we collect, whatever we're gathering information on, we need to make sure that it's actually used, actually effective, that it's not just for the sake of collecting data, because it's a waste of resources, it's a waste of people's time. And to be honest, we don't have extra time to give away. You know, we've got to make sure that our work is meaningful to society, that actually we're enabling this information to be used in real time, you know, in our lives now, such that it enhances the development and the progress of people. And that feeds back into that African evaluation mindset, that this must be meaningfully done and done in such a way that it imparts value. And so these are some of the closing comments that we wanted to leave with you today, that it's, as we're going around thinking about what kind of tools we can use, AI, all of that, let's not forget the culture, the context, the collaboration components of data collection and the science behind data collection, that ultimately this is about people and how we're engaging with people and the appropriateness behind engaging with people in that way. So I hope that you've enjoyed the session today. We do want to take a moment to thank Bridge for hosting us today on their platform and enabling us to partner with them in presenting this webinar. Samia as well, the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association, have also contributed to this. So I hope that if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to put them in the chat or mention them now. But we have reached the end of our presentation. So we really want to thank you for joining. We will share the recordings and the slides with everybody that registered. So yes, let me stop sharing now and we'll stay on for a couple of minutes in case there are any final questions or comments.